You worthless black trash! How dare you touch my things with those filthy hands? Eleanor's voice sliced through the air like a whip crack, her eyes blazing with contempt as she towered over Sarah in the opulent drawing room. Sarah's fist clenched at her sides, knuckles whitening, but she bit down hard on her lip, drawing a bead of blood to stifle any retort. Eleanor leaned in closer, her perfectly manicured nails jabbing the air inches from Sarah's face. I hired you out of pity, but you're nothing but a lazy burden. Clean this mess now, or I'll make sure you never work again. Sarah's shoulders tensed, her breath hitching as she knelt to pick up the scattered papers Eleanor had flung to the floor. The room's heavy silence amplified every rustle, every sharp intake of air. Upstairs, Richard Vance paused mid-stride in his study, his hand freezing on the door handle. He had built an empire from code and steel, but this raw venom from his own wife, pierced deeper than any boardroom betrayal. His jaw tightened, veins pulsing in his neck as memories flooded back. Lillian's gentle smile in that faded photo on his desk, her final days fighting a disease that stole her light. He shook it off, forcing his focus back to the glowing screen, but the echo of Eleanor's words lingered like poison. Down below, Eleanor straightened her silk blouse, her face morphing back into that mask of refined elegance as guests arrived for the charity meeting. Darlings, welcome, she purred, air-kissing cheeks with practiced grace. Today we're discussing true compassion, lifting the downtrodden. Her laughter tinkled like crystal, but Sarah, wiping sweat from her brow in the shadows, felt the sting anew. She moved like a ghost through the halls, polishing silver with mechanical precision, her dark eyes shadowed by unspoken fears. A single mother scraping by, she had traded her nursing scrubs for this uniform years ago, all for Leo's sake. But Eleanor's barbs cut fresh wounds each day, reminding her of her place, invisible, expendable. Richard descended the stairs quietly, his presence commanding even in silence. He nodded curtly to the guests, his mind elsewhere, buried in algorithms and acquisitions. Vance Industries thrived under his iron grip, but home felt like a hollow shell since Lillian. Eleanor caught his eye, flashing a dazzling smile. Richard, join us? We're saving the world, one donation at a time. He forced a thin smile, but his gaze flicked to Sarah, who averted her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she served tea. Something stirred in him, a flicker of unease like code revealing a hidden bug. The meeting droned on, Eleanor's voice weaving tales of empathy, but Sarah's quiet efficiency betrayed the cracks. A dropped spoon here, a hurried wipe there. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, ignored for now, but the vibration sent a jolt through her spine. As the guests chattered, Eleanor's hand brushed Sarah's arm dismissively. More tea, girl, and make it hot this time. Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, her mind racing to Leo's latest doctor's note. The contrast burned. Eleanor's public halo versus the private thorns. Richard watched from the periphery, his fingers drumming on his thigh, the first thread of doubt unraveling in his chest. The charity guests had barely stepped out the door when Eleanor's mask shattered. Sarah! Her voice was a razor, slicing through the clink of porcelain as Sarah stacked cups in the kitchen. You call this clean? This glass is a disgrace. She snatched a crystal tumbler from the counter, holding it up to the light, her lips curling into a sneer. A faint smudge, barely visible, gleamed under her scrutiny. I swear you're trying to embarrass me. Do it again. Now! Sarah's fingers tightened around the sponge, her jaw clenching so hard her teeth ached. She scrubbed the glass, her hands moving faster, but her eyes burned with unshed tears. Yes, Mrs. Vance, she whispered, her voice barely audible, each word a surrender. Eleanor leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her heels clicking impatiently on the marble floor. Honestly, Sarah, I don't know why I keep you. Lazy, incompetent, and checking your phone like some teenager? She'd caught the faint buzz from Sarah's apron pocket, her eyes narrowing like a predator's. Sarah froze, her heart hammering. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, Leo's name attached to the message. Her fingers twitched, desperate to check it. But Eleanor's glare pinned her in place. "Put that thing away," Eleanor snapped, stepping closer. "You're here to work, not to slack off with your little dramas." Sarah shoved the phone deeper into her pocket, her pulse racing. Leo's condition had been unstable for weeks, each hospital call a knife twisting in her gut. She nodded, muttering another apology, her voice cracking as she turned back to the sink. Eleanor huffed, tossing her hair. "Pathetic," she muttered, striding out, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of her words. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second amplifying Sarah's dread. She stole a glance at her phone, her hands shaking as she read, "Leo's tests are urgent. Call back ASAP." Her breath caught, a quiet gasp escaping as she pressed a hand to her chest, fighting to stay composed. Unseen, Richard stood at the top of the staircase, his briefcase half open, forgotten in his hand. He'd come back for a file, something about the Vance Pediatric Heart Project, a legacy tied to Lillian's memory. But Eleanor's venom stopped him cold. He lingered in the shadows, his sharp eyes catching every flinch in Sarah's posture, every cruel syllable from his wife's lips. His fingers tightened around the leather handle, knuckles whitening. Eleanor's voice echoed in his mind, clashing with the woman he thought he'd married, a pillar of charity, a beacon of grace. The dissonance gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. He stepped back into his study, closing the door with a soft click, but the image of Sarah's trembling hands burned into his thoughts. He opened the file, his eyes scanning the words, Pediatric Heart Project. But his mind was elsewhere. Eleanor's cruelty wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of everything he'd built, everything Lillian had stood for. He sat down heavily, staring at the photo of his first wife, her kind eyes a stark contrast to the venom downstairs. His fingers brushed the frame, a quiet vow forming in his chest. He didn't know Sarah's story yet, but he knew one thing. Something was rotten in his house, and he'd tear it apart to find the truth. The faint buzz of Sarah's phone echoed again from the kitchen below, unanswered, a ticking bomb waiting to explode. "Don't you dare breathe a word of this to anyone," Eleanor hissed, her voice low but venomous as she cornered Sarah in the pantry. She waved a payroll slip, her eyes glinting with malice. "This deduction is for that cracked vase. You think you can destroy my antiques and walk away?" Sarah's hands shook, gripping a broom so tightly her knuckles paled. She knew that vase was flawed before she touched it, Richard's late mother's relic, already chipped. But Eleanor's accusation was a noose tightening around her neck. "I didn't," Sarah started, but Eleanor cut her off, stepping so close Sarah could smell her lavender perfume. "Shut it. You're lucky I don't fire you on the spot." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, her chest heaving as she swallowed the truth. Upstairs, Richard stood by his office window, his silhouette rigid against the glass. His fingers hovered over his laptop, but his eyes were fixed on the garden below, where Sarah later emerged to sweep the patio. Her movements were mechanical, her shoulders hunched like she carried an invisible weight. He'd seen her like this for days, weeks maybe, her frame thinner, her steps slower. Yesterday, he'd caught her in the kitchen, nibbling a stale crust of bread, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. His stomach twisted. This wasn't the Sarah who'd once navigated his home with quiet precision. Something was breaking her, and Eleanor's voice, sharp as a blade, was the hammer. He replayed the scene he'd overheard. Eleanor's venom, Sarah's silence. It clawed at him, stirring memories of Lillian's frail hands clutching his, begging him to help others like her. Richard's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into a fist. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. Every move calculated, every decision weighed. But Eleanor's cruelty was a glitch in his system, one he couldn't ignore. He began to notice the patterns. Sarah's pay stubs, always short. Eleanor's sudden rages over trivial mistakes. The way Sarah flinched when Eleanor's heels clicked near. His eyes narrowed, scanning Sarah as she swept below, her face etched with exhaustion. He didn't know her story, but he recognized suffering, raw, unrelenting, like Lillian's in her final days. Richard turned from the window, his mind racing. He opened his desk drawer, pulling out a worn business card. Marcos, a private investigator who'd once saved his company from a corporate spy. His fingers tapped the card, a decision crystallizing. He wouldn't confront Eleanor, not yet. He needed proof, something concrete to unravel her facade. His gaze flicked to the photo of Lillian, her smile a silent accusation. He dialed Marcos, his voice low and steady. I need you to dig. Start with my wife, and Sarah, everything. No one knows. He hung up, his pulse steady but his eyes burning with a new fire. Outside, Sarah paused, leaning on the broom, her breath ragged. Her phone buzzed again. Another hospital alert about Leo. She glanced at the mansion, Eleanor's shadow moving behind a curtain. Fear coiled in her gut, but she straightened, gripping the broom tighter. She had no choice but to keep going. Upstairs, Richard watched, his hand still on the phone, the first piece of a dangerous puzzle clicking into place. Sign here or you're out on the street. Eleanor thrust a document under Sarah's nose, her voice a venomous hiss in the dim light of the laundry room. The paper trembled in Sarah's hands, a so-called pay advance agreement that reeked of deceit. Sarah's eyes scanned the fine print, her heart sinking as she recognized the trap. Signing meant agreeing to a debt she'd never escape, chaining her to this house. I need time to read it, Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, cutting. Time? You don't get time. Sign it, or I'll make sure your precious Leo starves. Sarah's fingers froze, her breath hitching at the mention of her son. She gripped the pen, her hands shaking as she scrawled her name, each stroke a betrayal of her own dignity. Miles away, in a cramped office lit by a single flickering bulb, Marcos leaned over his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Richard's call had set him in motion, and now he was peeling back the layers of Eleanor's carefully curated life. Bank statements, hidden accounts, and suspicious transfers painted a grim picture. Eleanor wasn't just docking Sarah's pay. She'd engineered a web of fake loans and deductions, siphoning thousands from Sarah's wages into an offshore account. Marcos's jaw tightened as he uncovered the scale of it. Sarah was paid less than half what she was owed, trapped in a cycle of fabricated debt. Clever, he muttered, his eyes narrowing, but sloppy. His investigation didn't stop there. He dug into Sarah's past, expecting little more than a standard employment history. What he found stopped him cold. Sarah Johnson wasn't just a maid. She'd been a lead pediatric nurse at Johns Hopkins, a star in her field, with commendations stacked high. Her career ended abruptly 5 years ago, right after her son Leo's diagnosis, Shone's complex, a rare heart condition that demanded her full attention. Marcos leaned back, his chair creaking, as he pieced it together. Sarah had traded her stethoscope for a mop, her expertise buried under Eleanor's cruelty, all to keep Leo alive. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his weathered face. Marcos compiled the report, his notes meticulous but urgent. He cross-referenced Eleanor's accounts, finding more discrepancies. Charity funds misdirected, donations funneled into personal expenses. Eleanor's mask of philanthropy was a lie, her empire built on exploitation. He sent Richard an encrypted file, his message curt, "You're not gonna like this." Back at the Vance mansion, Sarah folded linens with mechanical precision, her hands raw from bleach. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another hospital bill, another reminder of Leo's fragile heart. She pressed her lips together, fighting the panic clawing at her chest. She didn't know Marcos existed, didn't know eyes were watching her suffering. Richard's phone pinged as he sat in his study, the screen casting a cold glow on his face. He opened Marcos's email, his pulse quickening as he skimmed the findings. Eleanor's financial betrayal was bad enough, but Sarah's past hit harder. A nurse, a mother, a woman crushed under his wife's heel, fighting for a child with the same disease his foundation was built to cure. His hand clenched around the phone, his knuckles whitening. Eleanor's voice drifted from downstairs, laughing with a guest, oblivious to the storm brewing above. Richard's eyes flicked to Lillian's photo, her gentle gaze a silent command. He stood, his chair scraping the floor, his resolve hardening like steel. Sarah's phone buzzed again, unanswered, as she folded another sheet, her fingers trembling with the weight of her unseen chains. "You're nothing but a thief in my house." Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip, her finger jabbing at Sarah as she stood trembling in the dining room. A silver candlestick lay on its side, a supposed theft Eleanor had staged to justify another pay cut. Sarah's lips parted, her breath shallow, but no words came. Eleanor's glare silenced her. "I should call the police," Eleanor sneered, her heels clicking as she circled Sarah like a vulture. "But I'm generous. I'll just take it out of your wages, again." Sarah's hands balled into fists, her nails digging into her palms until they stung. She knew the candlestick was a setup, but her voice was trapped, buried under years of fear and Leo's mounting medical bills. In his study, Richard sat frozen, Marcos's report open on his laptop. The words Schoen's complex burned into his vision, each syllable a gut punch. His fingers hovered over the screen, his pulse hammering in his ears. Sarah's son, Leo, had the same rare heart condition that Lillian had fought to cure, the same disease driving the Vance Foundation's mission. His eyes flicked to Lillian's photo, her gentle smile now a piercing accusation. The irony was brutal. The woman his wife tormented was the mother of a child his life's work aimed to save. His chest tightened, rage and guilt colliding like a storm. He scrolled further, Marcos's findings laying Eleanor bare. Fake loans, siphoned charity funds, a paper trail of lies that trapped Sarah in financial servitude. Richard's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding, as he read how Eleanor had manipulated Sarah into signing debt agreements, each one a shackle. He slammed the laptop shut, his knuckles white. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a betrayal of everything Lillian stood for, a mockery of the foundation Richard had poured his soul into. His hands shook, not from fear, but from a fury so sharp it felt like a blade in his chest. He stood pacing the room, his mind racing. Eleanor's laughter floated up from downstairs, her voice dripping with false warmth as she entertained another guest. Richard's fingers curled into a fist, his nails biting into his skin. He could confront her now, tear her apart with words, but that wasn't enough. She'd humiliated Sarah in private. He'd expose her in public, where her precious reputation would shatter. His eyes narrowed, a plan forming, cold, precise, like the code he'd built his empire on. He grabbed his phone, texting Marcos. "Keep digging. I want everything." His thumb hovered over the send button, then pressed it with a force that mirrored his resolve. Downstairs, Sarah wiped the dining table, her movements slow, her face etched with exhaustion. Her phone buzzed in her apron. Another hospital alert, another reminder of Leo's fragile heart. She glanced at the candlestick, its silver glinting mockingly. Her shoulders slumped, her breath hitching as she fought the despair clawing at her. She didn't know Richard was watching, didn't know her pain had ignited a fire that would burn Eleanor's world to ash. Upstairs, Richard opened his laptop again, his eyes locked on the Vance Foundation's mission statement, the words blurring as his anger solidified into purpose. The faint chime of Eleanor's laughter echoed below, a ticking clock counting down to her ruin. "You think you're fooling anyone with that fake humility," Eleanor snapped, her voice dripping with scorn as she caught Sarah adjusting a floral centerpiece in the drawing room. The table was set for perfection, crystal glasses gleaming, silverware aligned like soldiers, all for the tea party that could secure Eleanor's place on the Metropolitan Museum's board. Sarah's hands froze mid-motion, her fingers clutching a rose stem, a thorn pricking her skin. She bit back a wince, her jaw tight. "I was just," she began, but Eleanor cut her off, stepping closer, her eyes glinting with malice. "Just making a mess, as usual. Fix it, or I'll have you scrubbing floors until midnight." Sarah nodded, her throat burning, and adjusted the flowers with trembling hands, her heart pounding with the weight of Eleanor's relentless cruelty. Upstairs, Richard paced his study, his phone clutched tightly, Marcos's latest message burning in his mind. "Eleanor's meeting with Dubois today. Perfect stage." He glanced at the invitation on his desk, Eleanor's elegant script boasting of the tea party, a showcase of her so-called philanthropy. His lips curled into a grim smile. She wanted a stage? He'd give her one, a spotlight to expose every lie. He texted Eleanor, his words calculated. "Make it grand. I'll be there." Her reply was instant, effusive. "Oh, darling, you're my hero." Richard's fingers tightened around the phone, his pulse steady, but his eyes cold as steel. He slipped on his jacket, his movements deliberate, like a general preparing for battle. Downstairs, Eleanor glided through the room, her silk dress whispering as she greeted early guests, her smile a polished mask. "Mrs. Dubois will be here soon," she purred to a socialite, her voice honeyed. "This is my moment." Sarah moved silently, serving tea with mechanical precision, her face a blank canvas, hiding the storm inside. Her phone was silent now, but the hospital's last message, Leo's worsening condition, clawed at her thoughts. She poured tea, her hands steady despite the panic coiling in her chest. Eleanor's eyes flicked to her, narrowing. "Faster, Sarah. Don't embarrass me." Sarah nodded, her lips pressed tight, her fingers brushing the phone in her apron, desperate for a moment to check on Leo. Richard descended the stairs, his presence commanding, his face unreadable. He nodded to the guests, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Sarah's rigid posture, then Eleanor's radiant facade. He took a seat near the back, his fingers drumming on his knee, a predator waiting for the perfect strike. Eleanor didn't notice, too busy charming a donor, her laughter ringing out like a bell. Sarah poured another cup, her hands shaking slightly, the weight of her unseen burdens pressing harder. The room buzzed with anticipation, every clink of china and murmur of voices building toward a moment none of them could predict. Eleanor's laughter cut through the air again, oblivious to the trap tightening around her. "You dare interrupt my moment with your pathetic excuses?" Eleanor's voice sliced through the drawing room, her eyes blazing as she snatched Sarah's buzzing phone from her trembling hands. The tea party was in full swing, Mrs. Dubois sipping chamomile, while nodding at Eleanor's polished spiel about charity. Sarah's face drained of color, her breath catching as the hospital's number flashed on the screen. "It's my son," she stammered, her voice cracking. But Eleanor cut her off, her lips curling into a sneer. "Your son? A cheap lie to shirk work." She slammed the phone onto the floor, the crack of plastic echoing like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the guests, their teacups freezing midair. Sarah's knees buckled, her hands clutching the edge of the table, her nails scraping wood as she fought to stay upright. "Need to go," Sarah whispered, her voice raw, her eyes fixed on the shattered phone. The hospital's words replayed in her mind. "Leo's critical. Emergency procedure. Come now." Her chest heaved, panic clawing at her throat. Eleanor stepped closer, her heels clicking like a countdown. "You'll go when I say you go," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "Get back to work, or I'll make sure you regret it." Sarah's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms, drawing tiny beads of blood. She wanted to scream, to shove past Eleanor, but the weight of years, debts, threats, Leo's life, pinned her in place. Her lips trembled, her gaze darting to the guests, who averted their eyes, uncomfortable but silent. Mrs. Dubois cleared her throat, her brows furrowing. "Eleanor, perhaps," she began, but Eleanor's laugh cut her off, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, don't mind her, darling. Just a clumsy maid with no manners." She waved a hand, her smile tight, but her eyes burned with warning as they locked on Sarah. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for a tray, her movements mechanical, her heart screaming for Leo. She could still hear the nurse's voice, urgent, pleading. "We need your consent now." Her breath hitched, a quiet sob escaping before she clamped it down, her jaw aching from the effort. Richard sat at the back, his fingers gripping the armrest, his knuckles white. He'd heard every word, seen every flinch. Eleanor's cruelty wasn't new, but this was a line crossed, a wound too deep. His eyes flicked to Sarah's shattered phone, then to Eleanor's smug expression. His pulse thundered, a cold fury rising like a tide. He stood, his chair scraping softly, unnoticed by the chattering guests. Sarah's desperation, Eleanor's malice. It was a mirror of everything he'd failed to protect Lillian from. His hand slipped into his pocket, brushing the folded report from Marcos, its weight a promise of justice. Sarah picked up the tray, her hands trembling, her eyes glistening but defiant. She didn't see Richard stand, didn't know the storm was about to break. Eleanor turned back to Mrs. Dubois, her smile radiant, oblivious to the shadow looming behind her. How dare you ruin my day with your filthy lies? Eleanor's voice lashed out, still ringing in the stunned silence of the drawing room as Sarah stood frozen, her shattered phone at her feet. The guests sat rigid, their eyes darting between Eleanor's flushed face and Sarah's trembling form. Sarah's hands gripped the serving tray so tightly her knuckles blanched, her breath shallow, each inhale a battle against the panic crushing her chest. Leo's name echoed in her mind, the hospital's urgent call a scream she couldn't answer. Eleanor stepped forward, her smile a venomous crescent. "Pick it up and get out of my sight," she spat, pointing at the broken phone. Sarah's knees shook, but she didn't move, her eyes locked on the floor, her heart fracturing under the weight of her son's life. Richard emerged from the garden door, his footsteps deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade. The room fell deathly quiet, every head turning as his presence filled the space. His face was a mask of icy calm, but his eyes burned with a fury that made even Mrs. Dubois shift in her seat. He stopped beside Sarah, his shadow falling over her like a shield. Without a word, he knelt, picking up the cracked phone with a gentleness that contrasted his rigid posture. Sarah's breath hitched, her eyes flicking to him, wide with shock. "Hospital?" he asked, his voice low, steady, cutting through the room's suffocating air. "Which one? Doctor's name?" Sarah stammered, her voice barely audible. "St. Mary's. Dr. Carter." Richard nodded, his jaw tight, and pulled out his own phone. He dialed, his voice unwavering as he spoke, each word a hammer strike. "This is Richard Vance. Please have Dr. Alistair Croft, Chief of Cardiology, join us. Prep the OR for the Vance protocol. I'm bringing the patient's mother now." The guests gasped, murmurs rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Eleanor's smile faltered, her hands clenching her pearl necklace. "Richard, darling, what are you—" she started, but he didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Sarah, softening for the first time. "Let's go, Sarah. We're saving your son." He turned to the room, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces, landing on Eleanor last. His voice was cold, final, like a judge's gavel. "The party's over." Eleanor's face drained of color, her lips parting, but no words came. The guests shifted, their whispers growing louder, sensing the power shift. Sarah clutched the tray tighter, her eyes glistening, torn between fear and a flicker of hope. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the door, his stride unwavering. Eleanor took a step forward, her voice shrill. "Richard, you can't—" But he didn't turn back, his silence more damning than any words. The front door closed behind them, leaving Eleanor alone in the wreckage of her perfect facade, her guests' eyes boring into her like knives. "You think you can just walk away and humiliate me like that?" Eleanor's voice, shrill and desperate, echoed in Richard's mind as he sped through the city, Sarah in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white, her jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. The hospital's last call, Leo's critical condition, looping in her head like a siren. Richard's eyes stayed fixed on the road, his grip on the wheel unyielding, his voice cutting through her panic. "Focus, Sarah. Tell me about Leo's condition." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling but clear. "Shone's complex. His heart. It's failing. They need to operate now." Richard's jaw tightened, his foot pressing harder on the gas, the car surging forward. At St. Mary's, the hospital doors burst open as Richard stormed in, Sarah trailing behind, her apron still tied, her hands shaking. Nurses parted like a wave, recognizing Richard's name, his authority. Dr. Alistair Croft met them in the corridor, his face grim but focused. "Mr. Vance, we're prepping the OR. The Vance protocol is ready." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes darting to Richard, confusion mixing with hope. "Vance protocol," she whispered. Richard's gaze softened just for a moment. "My foundations work. For kids like Leo." He turned to Croft, his voice steel. "Best team, now." Croft nodded, already barking orders, the hallway erupting into controlled chaos. Sarah stood frozen, her hands twisting the apron, watching doctors and nurses move with precision she hadn't seen since her own days in scrubs. A nurse approached, her tone respectful. "Ms. Johnson, we need your input on Leo's history." Sarah's eyes widened, her old instincts kicking in. She followed, her voice steadying as she rattled off Leo's medical details, medications, episodes, surgeries, her hands no longer trembling, but moving with purpose. Richard watched, his chest tightening, seeing not a maid but the nurse she'd been, the expert buried under Eleanor's cruelty. He stepped back, pulling out his phone, his fingers flying as he mobilized resources. Top surgeons flown in, equipment expedited, every dollar of his empire poured into this moment. Hours later, Croft emerged, sweat on his brow, his face breaking into a rare smile. He's stable. Surgery's a success. Sarah's knees buckled, her hands covering her face, a sob breaking free. Richard caught her arm, steadying her, his touch firm but gentle. He's strong, like his mother, he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening, her breath ragged but relieved. The hospital corridor hummed with quiet triumph, nurses exchanging nods, the weight of a life save settling over them. Richard's phone buzzed, Marcos with more damning evidence on Eleanor, but he silenced it, his eyes on Sarah, her face lit with fragile hope. The fight wasn't over, but for now Leo's heartbeat was victory enough. You thought you could play me for a fool in my own house? Richard's voice was a low growl, cutting through the silence of the mansion's study as he faced Eleanor. She stood by the fireplace, her hands twisting a silk scarf, her usual poise crumbling under his icy stare. Her lips parted, a protest forming, but Richard raised a hand, silencing her. Don't. I've seen the numbers, Eleanor. Every cent you stole, every lie you spun. He tossed a thick folder onto the desk, its pages spilling evidence of her fraud. Bank statements, forged loan agreements, diverted charity funds. Eleanor's face paled, her fingers tightening on the scarf until her knuckles whitened. Richard, I can explain, she started, but his glare cut her off, sharp as a blade. He stepped closer, his voice cold, each word deliberate. You preyed on Sarah. You preyed on my trust. You preyed on Lillian's memory. Eleanor flinched at Lillian's name, her eyes darting to the photo on the desk, its gentle smile a silent rebuke. Richard's hand slammed down on the folder, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You're done. He slid 2 documents across the desk, a divorce petition and a legal notice stripping her of all claims to his estate, citing fraud. Eleanor's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she reached for the papers, her eyes scanning the words that spelled her ruin. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking, but Richard's face remained stone. You disgraced everything I built, he said, his tone unyielding. You have 24 hours to leave this house. Take what's yours, nothing more. Eleanor's knees buckled, her hand grabbing the desk for support, her carefully crafted world collapsing. She opened her mouth again, her voice rising in desperation. Richard, please, we can fix this. But he turned away, his back rigid, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkened garden, his mind replaying Sarah's trembling hands, Leo's fragile heartbeat, and Lillian's dying wish. His fingers clenched, his resolve ironclad. Eleanor sank into a chair, her scarf slipping to the floor, her eyes wide with shock. The folder lay open, its pages a testament to her betrayal, each line a nail in her coffin. Richard didn't look back, his voice low but final. Pack your things. Don't make me call security. The room felt heavy, the air thick with her defeat. She stood, her heels clicking unevenly as she stumbled toward the door, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow. Richard's gaze stayed fixed outside, his jaw tight, his heart heavy but unyielding. The study door clicked shut behind her, the sound final, like the closing of a chapter he'd never wanted to write. You're not here to serve me anymore. Richard's voice was steady, cutting through the sterile hum of the hospital room where Sarah sat beside Leo's bed. The boy slept, his small chest rising and falling, a monitor beeping softly in rhythm. Sarah's hands gripped the chair's armrests, her knuckles pale, her eyes red-rimmed from hours of vigil. She looked up, startled, her breath catching at Richard's words. What? She whispered, her voice hoarse, expecting another blow. Richard stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the morning light, his usual steel softened by something raw. "You're not a maid, Sarah. You never should have been." He turned, his eyes locking onto hers, intense but warm. He stepped closer, pulling a chair beside her, his movements deliberate. "I know who you are," he said, his voice low but firm. "Lead pediatric nurse, Johns Hopkins. You gave it all up for Leo." Sarah's lips parted, her hands trembling as she glanced at her son, then back at Richard. Her past, buried under years of Eleanor's cruelty, felt like a wound ripped open. "How?" she started, but Richard raised a hand, his gesture gentle but commanding. "I had you checked out, not to hurt you, to understand." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Lillian, my first wife, she lived for kids like Leo. Her foundation, my foundation, it's for them, for him." Sarah's chest tightened, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Richard pulled a folder from his coat, sliding it across the bedside table. "This is a job offer. Director of Family Support, Vance Foundation. Use your skills, your heart, to help families like yours. No more scrubbing floors, no more debts." Sarah's eyes widened, her breath hitching as she opened the folder, her hands shaking. The words blurred: salary, benefits, a chance to reclaim her life. But the weight of it hit her like a wave. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" Richard's gaze softened, his fingers brushing the photo of Lillian in his pocket. "Because you're what she believed in. Because Leo deserves it. Because I failed you both by letting Eleanor." He trailed off, his jaw clenching, then steadied. "Work with me, Sarah." "Not for me." Sarah's eyes glistened, her throat tight as she looked at Leo, his small hand curled in hers. She nodded, a single tear falling, her voice breaking. "Okay." Richard's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a spark of hope flickered in his eyes. Outside, the hospital bustled, but in that room, a new partnership was born, forged in pain and purpose, with Leo's steady heartbeat as its anchor. "You're not invisible anymore," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice steady as she adjusted her blazer, standing at a podium in a packed conference hall. Her eyes scanned the crowd, doctors, donors, families, each face a reminder of her new purpose. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles no longer trembling, her words sharp and clear. "The Vance Foundation saved my son, Leo. Now we're saving others." Applause erupted, but her gaze drifted to Leo, now 7, laughing as he kicked a soccer ball in a nearby park, his cheeks flushed with life. Her chest swelled, her jaw tight with pride, the weight of her old apron replaced by the weight of responsibility. A year ago, she'd been scrubbing floors, her dreams buried under Eleanor's venom. Now, as director of family support, she navigated hospital corridors with authority, her old nurse's instincts sharpened by purpose. She met with parents, her voice calm but firm, guiding them through the terror of diagnoses like Leo's. Her hands, once raw from bleach, now held clipboards, signed grants, and clasped the hands of mothers fighting for their kids. At the conference, she gestured to a screen displaying the Vance Foundation's latest breakthrough, a new treatment for Shone's complex. Her eyes glistened, but her smile was fierce, a warrior's defiance against the past. Across town, Eleanor stood behind a retail counter, her silk dresses swapped for a polyester uniform, her hands fumbling with a cash register. Her face, once radiant with arrogance, was lined with exhaustion, her eyes dull as she rang up a customer's purchase. "Next," she muttered, her voice flat, her dreams of high society shattered. The tabloids had feasted on her fall, fraud, divorce, disgrace. But the world had moved on, leaving her in a cramped apartment, her pride a bitter pill she swallowed daily. She avoided mirrors, unable to face the reflection of her own choices. Richard watched Sarah's speech from the back of the hall, his arms crossed, his lips twitching into a rare smile. The grief that once chained him had loosened, replaced by a quiet fire. He'd thrown himself into the foundation, his suits less pristine, his hands often stained with ink from late-night planning sessions with Sarah. He laughed more, especially at hospital visits, where kids like Leo tugged at his sleeves, their giggles a balm to old wounds. His eyes lingered on Sarah, her strength a mirror of Lillian's, but her fire uniquely her own. He adjusted the photo of Lillian in his pocket, its edges worn, but its weight lighter now. Leo's laughter echoed from the park, a sound that carried hope, binding Sarah and Richard to a future they hadn't dared imagine. "You can't save everyone, but you can damn well try," Richard muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible as he walked beside Sarah through the hospital's garden courtyard. Children laughed nearby, their voices bright, chasing each other around a small fountain, their scars hidden beneath colorful shirts, survivors of the Vance Foundation's work. Sarah's hand brushed Leo's hair as he darted past, his grin wide, his energy unstoppable. Her lips curved into a quiet smile, her shoulders straight, no longer bowed by fear. Richard's eyes followed the boy, his jaw softening, a flicker of warmth breaking through his usual steel. His fingers grazed the worn photo of Lillian in his pocket, her memory a steady pulse guiding his steps. Sarah paused, her gaze settling on a young girl clutching a stuffed bear, her mother whispering thanks to a nurse. Sarah's chest tightened, her old pain echoing in the scene, but her voice was steady. "We're making a difference, Richard. For them." She nodded toward the children, her eyes fierce with purpose. Richard met her gaze, his nod curt but heavy with meaning. "For Lillian," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Sarah's hand hovered near his, not touching, but close enough to feel the unspoken bond forged through shared loss and triumph. Their steps synced, a quiet rhythm as they moved through the courtyard, the children's laughter a backdrop to their resolve. Across the city, Eleanor's reflection stared back from a dingy apartment mirror, her hands gripping the sink, her face etched with regret. She turned away, her fingers trembling as she folded a cheap sweater, her old life a ghost she couldn't escape. The world had moved on, but her shame lingered, a silent sentence for her cruelty. Back at the hospital, Richard and Sarah stopped by the fountain, watching a boy toss a coin, his wish a whisper lost in the splash. Sarah's eyes met Richard's, a spark of something new. Trust, respect, maybe more, glimmering between them, unspoken but alive. Richard's voice broke the silence, steady and clear. "Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's putting the right people where they belong." He looked at Sarah, then at the children, his hand tightening around Lillian's photo. Sarah nodded, her smile soft but fierce, her hand resting on Leo's shoulder as he ran back to her. The courtyard buzzed with life, a testament to their work, a promise of more to come. The coin in the fountain glinted under the water, a small wish carrying the weight of a new beginning. Justice isn't always found in a courtroom. It's in lifting those who've been crushed and giving them a chance to shine. Sarah's journey from a silenced maid to a beacon of hope shows that compassion and truth can rewrite even the darkest stories. What did this story stir in you? Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Thank you for watching, and if this moved you, hit that subscribe button to join us for more. See you next time.